Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters, and welcome to this week's live chat. I am so sorry that I wasn't here last week. I was a little under the weather, but feeling much better now, and super excited to be here to talk about machine quilting. Today I'm flying solo. Normally I have Jessica behind the computer to type your questions down and hand them to me, but instead I've been getting them from the type chat before we went live, and so I'll be addressing those. I'm also going to recap the last 2 weeks of the Dot to Dot video series that we've been working on, so excited to show you some examples and share some other tips on how to work through those. And then if I don't get a chance to view your questions or answer them, you can leave them in the comments and I'll try to address those next week. And be sure to hang out towards the end because an interesting topic came up in the type chat before I went live, and we're going to do a little poll. So I can't wait to talk about that. If this is your first live chat, if it's first time joining, we're smack dab in the middle of a free motion quilting video series, and I'm recapping kind of what I've shown in this week's tutorial. And normally it's something about machine quilting, but this happens to be pretty specific. But thank you for joining me, whether this has been your multiple, several, one, or if this is your first one. I definitely appreciate it, and I don't take your attention for granted. So thank you so much. All right, let's talk about the designs we learned in the last 2 weeks. So it's hard, I had to kind of like go back and think because I'm already working on next week's video. But we talked about different ways to quilt the starburst design, different variations with that. And we also talked about, how to use those designs in irregular areas and how to combine them. So we kind of started off with the basics and we're just building off of them. None of these designs are more difficult than any other ones. Some just might take a few more steps. And so when you're learning these variations, I just want to keep saying over and over again, I don't want you to be overwhelmed. This is just my persuasive argument. This is me showing you how great these designs are. Pick and choose the ones you like, leave the ones you don't, and use them on your quilts because they really are versatile designs that you can use in a lot of different ways. So the dot to dot technique, just a quick recap, is using reference points on our quilts to create these geometric motifs or designs quickly and easily. And so we learned 2 basic shapes, and one of them was the starburst. And so when we went into the starburst variations, most of those design ideas are just the result of applying that design to different areas on your quilts, right? This is what it looks like in a square and what it looks like in a triangle. And, if you've been machine quilting a while, you might be like, oh, this is kind of like the same thing over and over again. But it's so encouraging that you can take any design and learn a bunch of variations on how to quilt it and create even more versatility with your machine quilting repertoire. So when we saw the starburst design, one of the first things in that tutorial I showed was how you can add more or less wedges to your design. Again, none of this is going to cure the world's major problems, but definitely allow you to adapt these designs to your quilts. And whenever I'm working on a tutorial or working on a video, I'm always like trying to find pictures of the designs in actual quilts. Now, throughout the video series, I'm quilting on the panel I designed just for this video series, but I want to show them in actual quilts as well, just to show you like, hey, look, we can use these in other areas as well. In this particular block, you can see there's that starburst design, except I have 3 wedges per side, so more wedges to that starburst design. In the initial tutorial, it just had 2. So we added more wedges. It's going to give us a denser quilting design. It's also going to include more lines to the center of your block. So the more wedges you add, the more quilting is going to come to the center, and the more it's going to draw your eye to that area. Just be aware of that. It's a great thing if you want to show off something, but not so great if you're putting it around a point that you don't love. So this particular quilt was really fun. I think the name was Modern Technology. I can't remember. But there's a lot of half square triangles in here. And I just used that starburst design to group some of those triangles together. And one of the great things about doing that is when you have a seam, especially like those 4 triangles coming together, it is pretty much marking my reference points for me. And that seam kind of helps hide, where all those lines come to that point. If I had pieced this poorly, if those points didn't match, I would not be quilting that design in the center of that block. So again, just knowing where those lines are going to go is going to really help you show off the things that you want to highlight. All right, then we also talked about echoing. So, if you've watched any of my videos, any of my live chats, it's like echo, echo, echo. I love it because it's a way to highlight things and to separate it from the filler and to show it off. But in this example, instead of echoing outside of the block, we're echoing inside of the block. And this is something I would do if I'm, have a bigger block and I want some dense quilting. In this example here, I've only echoed half of the wedges. So you don't have to do every single wedge. You can do half or every other one. Really kind of fun way just to, give it a little bit of a different texture, different look. And so one thing that I do, and I think I said this in the video, I like to quilt my outer wedge first, and then I echo it, and then I move on. Again, that's just how I do it. And when I'm filming these videos, and I say it so many times, you can go about quilting these designs in the orientation that you prefer, right? So as you're quilting, if you're like, I don't know why she does it this way, that's silly. I'm gonna quilt all my wedges and then come back and echo all of them. That's absolutely fine, totally fine. So please play around with them and find the orientation that you like. Now, this one is probably one of my favorites, although to be honest, I always say they're all my favorite. But this is the offset starburst. So up to this point, we've had all our wedges come to the center of the block because it's gonna fit bigger blocks. But in this example, we're moving that home base from the center and just kind of offsetting it a bit, just to give it a fun, kind of wonkier, different look. I think it's really cool if you have blocks on point. I couldn't find any good pictures of this. I'm kind of mad at past Angela for not taking more photos of my quilting, but it's fine. So if I have a block on point, moving that, home base down just kind of gives it, weights it a little bit more to the bottom. Now, I really should pause and just reiterate this. I don't have any kind of art degree. I'm just saying what I think and what I like. So there's not anything to back this up. It's just my opinion. But the good news is I totally happen to be the expert of my opinion. So it works out great. So the offset starburst is just for a fun, whimsical, different look. I love this for kids' quilts, improvisationally pieced blocks that are kind of wonky anyway. Or if you're just really having trouble hitting the center of your block, right? Let's just avoid that and make it easier on you. But if you're going to offset that home base, let's make sure it's enough that it looks intentional. I don't want it kind of close to the center because I don't want people to think I tried and missed it. So if you're gonna offset it, make it intentional. And as you're quilting it, it's gonna feel weird, especially if you're newer to machine quilting, because some of those wedges are gonna be really long and some are gonna be shorter, but that's how it's supposed to be. Every step will be the same. I'm just going further to my home base sometimes and sometimes not as far. So don't let it overwhelm you. It's just the same kind of idea. So you're gonna see now as we get going into this, we're gonna be moving that home base all sorts of places. And where we put that home base, where those lines go is where our eye will go, in my opinion. It's where the attention is drawn. And so one of the questions that came up in the type chat was, how do you know which designs will highlight which area? And I think a good rule of thumb, where the lines go is where your eyes go. So in this example, we've moved the home base from the center or inside the block to one of the corners and quilted those wedges so that they extend from that point. This is great for smaller blocks that I don't have quite enough room for the starburst design, but I especially love it in pieced blocks. So if I have a block with some cornerstones, it's a great way to kind of draw your eye to that point. I have some examples of that in actual quilts here in a second, but just know you can move that home base around. When it comes to adding the wedges in your area, you can see both of these. I quilted 4 wedges. I just felt like doing it that way. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no right or wrong. Just whatever you feel like quilting, however many you feel like quilting, it'll be fine. So here's a good example of that idea in a block. So we have some triangles. I have those wedges extending from the corner, except I have it all in the center here. So again, this is like a pinwheel. It's drawing your eye to the center of the block. And you can even see in the little gray triangles, I just did one little wedge in there just to, again, for fun. I liked how it looked. So where those lines go, the eyes will go as well. If I had pieced this not well, I would not pick this design. So again, just really kind of being aware of what you want to highlight, what you love about that block, and how you can draw attention to that. You don't have to overthink it though. I mean, just because I like to overthink my quilting doesn't mean you have to. But for those of you out there that might have stumbled on here and aren't really into machine quilting, if you're working with a professional long armor or somebody machine quilting, this is good information to share, right? Don't be afraid to show the quilt and be like, hey, I didn't piece this very well. This is not the block I want you to show off. I mean, that wasn't in my notes. That's just a freebie. But again, just being aware of where you want to show off and what you like. All right, so this is a quilt that Tula Pink did. I can't remember the name of it. It's been a while ago. But here's an example of that bigger pieced star. And I just quilted those triangles so that they kind of came to the center, and you can kind of see that area there. I could have went about it a totally different way. She's made this kind of pattern a couple times in different fabrics, and I've quilted it differently each time. So it just depends on what I'm feeling like, but just a good example of using that dot to dot within a pieced block to kind of draw attention to different areas. It's so fun. It's like going down a walk down memory lane. I'm like, oh, I kind of remember what was going on in my life at that point. But here's a little bit closer up picture. We're going to talk about filling in irregularly shaped areas, but this is just kind of like a little hint there. You can use some echo lines to take that area and kind of shrink it down and make it easier to quilt. In this example, I added the echo lines just because it adds a little bit, more to the design. It just looks a little bit more elegant, makes it look, fancier. And then here's an example of, using those echoed wedges. I love this concept in border corners. In fact, we've already seen this in a previous Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, the floral frames. But you can really use this in a lot of different areas. So even if you're looking at this, you're thinking, I don't make quilts with big triangles on it, but you can create those shapes there. So here it's a huge border, loved it, but I'm like, I'm just going to do a nice motif in the corner and then swirls in the rest. But adding those echoes inside just allows me to add more detail to that. Sometimes when I'm quilting a design, if I don't know what I'm going to do in the next area, I just kind of hang out right there and add more echo lines. Sometimes I do it just because I like the way it looks. All right, and then we saw the twirling wedges. So we went from moving that home base to now breaking up bigger blocks. And when you're looking at your quilts and you're trying to decide how to quilt it, I get it. That's like where the quilter's amnesia sets in. You forget every quilting design you've ever learned. That's different than the quilter's amnesia that sets in when you go to a quilt shop and forget how much fabric you have at home. But when you're looking at your blocks, think about how can I break this up and make it easier to manage. If you're working on a smaller throated long arm, maybe this is a block on point and you can't fit it in your throat space. I do 99% of my quilting on an 18-inch throat, which means I have about 16-inch space. And if I have a block on point, that's not going to fit every block. So look at that. Can I break it down, make it a little bit easier to manage? Or even on a sewing machine, right? If I can take this bigger chunk and make it 4 smaller chunks, it's a little bit more manageable. And all we did here is we just used the quilting to make an X to divide that square up into 4 triangles, and then I quilted wedges in each of those triangles. Now, in a lot of these more recent videos for Dot to Dot, I talk about stitching in the ditch or traveling along the edge of the block to get where I need to go. That's just how I like to work my way around. You don't have to do that. And in this example, in the video tutorial, you see me actually go around the whole block. Just know, again, that you can break that up, you can change it, you can work through that how you like to do it. So just because I like to do it doesn't mean that you have to. Again, it's just my opinion on that. And then here's another example of a piece block using those wedges within those triangles just to kind of show off the piecing there. So pretty fun. I found when I was preparing for this video series, I went and found all the unquilted blocks I could find so I could just quilt them up the blocks and have as examples. So a good practice if you want to try out some designs and you have any, blocks hanging around that aren't ever going to actually make it into a quilt. So again, you can see some wedges in here, in the center, on the points, on the corners, kind of showing it off. So when you're looking at it, and if you're not sure, and we'll see this in the irregularly shaped areas here in a second, if you're not sure if it's going to work, try drawing it out. If you can mark it out, you can quilt it out. So sometimes the happiest examples come whenever we're not sure what we're doing. So just be encouraged by that. And then we saw how we can use them in triangles. Now, triangles, I'm talking for this example, these are probably bigger triangles. This is going to be like a setting triangle around blocks on point, around maybe the edge of the quilt. And again, you know what I'm going to say, where you put that home base, where all those lines go, or where it's going to draw attention to. Now, this particular one, I quilted that center wedge, so it's more of a diamond or a kite shape, just to give it more of a motif style look. So if I have enough room and I have enough time, I might do something like that or add some echo lines to kind of jazz it up a bit. But again, it's a choose your own adventure. It's kind of, whatever you want to do. Now, I will say, knowing how long a design is going to take really does help influence whether I'm going to use it or not. The twirling wedges is going to take a little bit longer to develop because there's more steps. So I'm probably not going to put that on a quilt where I'm limited on time. I'm also probably not going to put a design that's really involved in a fabric where you can't even see the quilting. So a lot of these designs are meant to put in blocks where you can see the quilting, whether it's tonal fabric or solid, unless you're practicing. If you're practicing, well then heck yeah, go ahead and try it in that busier fabric because you won't be able to see it anyway. But in this week's video, we talked about combining designs. So we saw the two basic shapes, we learned some variations, and now we're going to put them together to create even more designs. And this is the point of the class/video series where I start feeling like an infomercial, right? But wait, there's more. But truly, you can do a lot with these, and we saw how you can use the diamond design and the wedges to combine together to make a different shape. But not just because it looks cool, because it does, but also as a way to take those bigger blocks and shrink them down. And so here we can see I have the diamond design on one half and the wedges on the other. Again, as you're working through your quilts, kind of just talk to yourself and, hopefully maybe when people aren't around, like, how can I make this easier? What am I struggling with? And if quilting those long lines are a struggle, then let's add more lines, but shrink them down. So we saw how you can do it in this example where they're coming from a corner, but then I also kind of showed how you can do it in one continuous motion. When I'm picking out how I'm going to show these things in the video series, I try to give a little, I won't say advanced, but next level, but just know that you can break it up into two different steps. It's totally fine. Just because I will go out of my way to not have to break thread, it's a totally different thing. And another example of that. So again, if I have a block that's too big for my throat space, using that diamond design to shrink it down. And just some different examples of that. And then this was the other one in the square here where I talked about we can move those wedges so that they extend from inside the block. This is such a fun way to, give it a little bit more of a custom elaborate look. It doesn't take much longer than doing the regular starburst design. And I especially love this when it's used around blocks. So if you have like a big star, using it inside or around those points of the star. And I think in the video I show a block that I've done that with. So it's really hard because in my mind I can see all of the secondary patterns. Thankfully you can't see in my mind because you would just be horrified by how messy it is in there. But just know that when you use these in different ways, a design that looks so basic can actually be pretty awesome when it creates a secondary pattern. Here's a real life example. Not that the other ones aren't real life, but a quilted example. This is a quilt I did for Tula. Nice big blocks. I mean, these blocks were ginormous. And so combining those designs allowed me to take those bigger blocks and add some interest, make it look neat, add a little bit more detail without going too crazy. So a little bit closer up here. In this example, I added the diamond design on the side and quilted the wedges from that point. Now the reason I picked that particular point is because it was all kind of aimed towards the center of the quilt, which was the biggest, most focal point. So in that fabric, I knew she's promoting her new fabric line. As much as she loves me and my quilting, her business is not, promoting my quilting. So I try to keep the quilting, I will say fairly basic for me, but not overwhelming to the fabric. So even though I have some different things going on there, I think you can still see the fabric and it still looks lovely. Not that there's anything that couldn't make her fabric not look lovely. Even though I combined the diamond design with the wedges, you could do the same thing with two diamonds. So this example is just in the bigger square, you can see I did diamond on one side and then diamond in the remaining space, or in the diamond here. See, how many times can I say diamond using some wedges? So again, this is just meant to be inspirational, if I can say that. That sounds a little pompous. Let's just say design ideas. So samples of how you can use these ideas. And what's really fun is you can get different looks for these different blocks, but it's the same design, just quilted a little bit differently. So people will be super impressed. You'll say thank you, it was nothing, and you'll know that it wasn't any more difficult to create those. So this one didn't make it into the video, but it's the twirling wedges, it's the zigzag design, both of them kind of with the two different shapes. So play around with it, see what you can come up with. I bet you can come up with a lot of different stuff. But unfortunately, the videos can't be 25 hours long, so we moved on from those combining designs to dealing with irregular shapes. And this was the one thing I really wanted to make sure I got into this video series, because it's one thing to know how to quilt it in a square. That's great. But not all the blocks we work with are going to be just squares. If you quilt for customers, you're going to see a lot of different things. If you're quilting for yourself and you're making sampler quilts, you're going to be dealing with a lot of different shapes. So how can we use this technique in other areas? So when I say irregularly shaped areas, I just mean anything beyond your standard square triangle, right? Whether it's combining two shapes to make a bigger one, whether it's area in between the blocks, it could be anything. So again, just me trying to get you to love this technique as much as I do. So I gave two different tips for dealing with these areas. One was using the edges of the block as a guide. So whenever I would say, when you're quilting your starburst, go up to the top, echo the side and come back. The reason I was very specific about echo the side, even though it was just horizontal or vertical, is because it's setting us up for this point right here. Once you get comfortable with just going up to that, edge, echoing it and coming back, you're going to see that you're going to create designs that will fit these areas and look great, and they look custom. They're really pretty easy because they're the same shape over and over again. So using the edge of the block as a guide, whether that is, something like this, where I'm quilting my wedges from one, corner of the block, whether I've moved my home base to the skinnier corner, you can kind of play around with where you put that. And another example here of using the echoing just to make that shape a little bit smaller, a little bit different looking. This is probably my all-time favorite example of dot to dot within an irregularly shaped area. So this was pieced by Heather Letterman, and it was beautiful, just gorgeous. I didn't get the whole picture. I mean, I have a whole picture of the quilt, I just don't have it for this. But, double wedding ring. And in between, I just couldn't decide what to do there. And I was like, oh, I can do the wedges. Perfect. Perfect example that dot to dot doesn't have to be in modern quilts. It doesn't have to be in your square blocks. And here I'm just using the edge as the guide. The difference here is the edge has a bit of a curve to it. I'm just echoing the side and then coming back. So again, use the piecing as your guide, and it will help guide you with that. I feel like that should be like a life mantra somewhere. Joining blocks, again, I love doing this. If I have a quilt with a lot of just repeating basic shapes, and I don't want to say basic, but simpler shapes, that doesn't sound any better, but repeating shapes, I can group them together to create different shapes. So in this example, it's just a triangle quilt, and I group them together to make a bigger diamond. Again, I'm easily amused. I find this so hilarious. Maybe I only get my own jokes, but it's fine. So again, using the edges of the block as a guide, whether you're looking at a block or you're creating an area for yourself. Sometimes I like to impose my will on the blocks that I'm quilting. Another example from Tula Pink is a sampler quilt that she put together. It had these gorgeous hearts, and I loved the idea of doing the dot to dot in there. Doing it on the corner means I could quilt that block and move on to the next. But again, you can see my home base. You can see where I echoed the side, where I came back, and it's just very lovely. So again, just examples of that. And how about a bear paw? So you can see in each of the ones, I did a slightly different design. Actually, in two, I did a design, and two, I did a different one. Same idea, though. I'm picking a home base and using the edges as the guide. You don't have to remember all this. Just know I can make it fit those areas. Now, it's not going to work in every area, depending on where you put that home base and how jagged the area is. So if you're not sure, just try drawing it out. I mean, I have sometimes I'll have a piece of paper. I'm just kind of like, will this work? And if you can draw it without picking up your pencil, then you can quilt it. So again, where the lines go is where the eyes go. And so all those lines come into that center block, because I kind of like how it's all grouped together. I gotta say though, as I'm quilting, sometimes I quilt it and I'm like, oh, this is why I love it. It's not like I'm thinking it out necessarily beforehand. It's just a good example. The second tip I shared, and again, this one is a little bit more abstract, but trust me, it's a lot of fun. You can use the quilting to create the shape you want to fill in. It's great. You're like, I wish I had a triangle. I'm just going to make a triangle and fill it in. And so I showed a couple different examples of that. This one here where we combined the wedges and the diamond design, it's the same shape as that, green and yellow one, just a different effect. And the lines are going to two different corners, right? Instead of going to that, middle point, it's kind of coming to the bottom corners. So again, where your lines go is where your eyes will go. So just know that. And then I showed the pineapple design. I love the pineapple design because it looks like a spiky pineapple. I have been caught humming the theme song to SpongeBob more than once when I've been quilting this. It's always interesting when I'm filming myself. I don't realize sometimes I'm humming and I gotta edit it back out. But so this particular design, I love how complex it looks, but it's the same steps over and over and over again. If you haven't watched the tutorial, you should check it out. But one of the questions that came up in the type chat was, Teresa asked, what does this highlight? Well, instead of highlighting a corner, it's highlighting that edge, right, that whole side. So it's not all going to those outer corners, it's just all up there. So again, it's just a slightly different look. I showed you how to quilt it in a triangle, and then a couple other examples of it. This one is one of my favorites. I mean, come on, they're all my favorites. That's just kind of how it is. But it's great because you can make it fit a lot of different shapes, a lot of different blocks. It looks complex, but once you see how it goes together, it's not. Again, check out my YouTube channel. You'll see the video on that. Pretty easy in how it goes together. I will say one thing I didn't show is you can quilt that in one continuous motion. Didn't have time for it in the video. Didn't really get around to that, but if you want to challenge, you can try to figure out how to do that. So if you don't like the stitching in the ditch, you can quilt that in one continuous motion, but I'll let you figure that one out for yourself. But the reason I love showing this is because I wanted to show it in a pieced block. So when I talked about where does the pineapple highlight, it highlights that edge, I can use that design to surround a center block. And so this particular block is just a square and a square, but when it's used in those rectangles, I love how it wraps around and just kind of like, hey, check this out. This is what I want you to see. Even though it's in a rectangle, I'm using the quilting to create my triangle and then filling it in. So pretty cool example, if I do say so myself. So this example, I have it wrapped around the center, but then I showed another example where it's flipped around. So the direction does matter. The direction of it will create those secondary designs. In this example, I like how the unquilted area almost makes a star type shape. This is something I would do in a block where the center isn't necessarily the focus of the block, right? Not that I don't like it, but it's just not a focal print. It's just a nice solid. And so that might be an example there. So when you're working with the designs, think about how are they going to look when used together? How can I wrap them around? What can I do to switch them up? And then can I use multiple of them in one block? Now, I know that not everybody likes to quilt things to death like I do, and that is totally fine. Again, we all have different preferences and different likes. But this example shows how you can take a square, break it up into those 4 triangles, and then quilt that pineapple design in all 4 of the triangles. So even though it looks complex, if you had just kind of stumbled on this block, maybe on Pinterest, you might think, oh my gosh, look how difficult that is. I could never do it. But now you know it's just the same shape over and over again. It's just rotated and wrapped around. I kind of liked, I almost made this joke in the video, but I took it out because it wasn't super funny. But it's like the half square triangle, right? It can do a lot of different things. So it's a mighty, mighty design. And then I moved on to show you how you could use it in irregularly shaped areas and how you can use the quilting to fill in any gaps. And so again, even though this kind of shape, there's a lot going on here, but the pineapple design in that shape, even though it's not your perfect square or your rectangle or even your triangle, it works. So again, you can use it in a lot of different ways. I feel like I'm at the point where I'm like trying to tell people how cute my kid is. Like, look how cute it is. Look how cute she is. But and this one didn't make it in the video. Honestly, I kind of liked how it was broken up. I used the quilting to break it up into square and triangles, but then it looked a lot like a spider, so I left it out. But just know when you're playing around with it, sometimes it doesn't turn out exactly like you think it should, and that's fine. Sometimes you know what not to do, and knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. So a couple other examples of using those wedges, combining it with other designs. We're going to see that in next week's video too. So normally when I'm quilting a quilt, let's say Tula brings me a quilt, I don't always just do dot to dot over the whole thing. Not only is it very repetitive, but I get kind of bored. I want to switch it up. So I love combining wishbones with echo lines with the dot-to-dot quilting. So if you're quilting along and you're like, I'm so tired of straight lines, just know that it's not how you have to quilt every quilt with every design. Another example of an irregularly shaped area, picking a home base and quilting those wedges that go to the edge. I had a few little examples of that, so just kind of showing that what that looks like. So really, as you're working through these quilts, I hope that you're excited and inspired to look at different ways to use them. So real quick, let me come back to the camera. So I know that's a lot of pictures, it's a lot to cover. Again, it's not meant to be overwhelming or it's not me showing off. It's just giving you design inspiration. And because if you can do that in a couple different shapes, you can use it in a lot of different blocks. All right, so there were some questions that came up before we went live. If you're ever free, the half an hour or so before I go live, we're always on there typing on the video, and it's a lot of fun getting to know everybody and share. And sometimes questions come up, and I'll answer them there, or I'll say, good question, I'll talk about that there. So one of the main questions Teresa asked, what designs bring attention to what? And I think I really tried to hit that through the pictures, but where the lines go, that's where your eye will go. So you can kind of use that as an example. Kathy asked, quilting on an English paper pieced quilt. So would I approach that any different? No. Even though an English paper pieced quilt is hand pieced, and I get it, all the seams are open, I would suppose the only time it would be a problem is if I was going to only stitch in the seams, and if I did such a great job of doing that I never veered off into the fabric at all. So, which is not going to happen for me. So I love English paper pieced quilts because usually it's simple shapes in bigger arrangements, and so it can create some stunning looking quilting. So no, have fun with it. It's a lot of fun. This isn't a question, but it was a comment that came up, and it said, this person, I don't want to say the name because I don't want them to embarrass them, but they did the starburst design twice and was struggling with it, and then realized, oh, they left the feed dogs up. And I just had to say, I have done that while filming this challenge, right? So, I don't know if that makes you feel encouraged or discouraged, but it happens sometimes. Laura said she's having trouble with the ruler foot. She can't get the right height. So the reason I designed this fabric panel is so we have this quilt type thing to work through, but on an actual quilt, you're going to have to deal with seams, right? And even seams that are like wobbly. And so when you're working with your ruler foot, you want to find that right height. And so if you're having trouble getting over those seams, you need to raise your foot up a bit. But if you're going so high, if you go too high, you'll skip stitches. Okay, so what I would do is I would raise it, test it, raise it, test it, until I start getting skip stitches, and I'd lower it a little bit, and then that's where that sweet spot will be. But sometimes there's quilts that have bulkier seams than others, so you might have to adjust it in between each quilt. I know it's kind of not the best answer, but much like all of quilting, it's like a trial and error kind of thing. Dina asked, what designs are you supposed to quilt on the panel? So when I design the panel, I'm like thinking through, what kind of shapes would be great for these designs, and how can I arrange them so that it looks interesting? You can quilt any design anywhere. So when I say your challenge for this week is to fill the areas highlighted in red with the designs we learned, it's just giving you a guide. You can quilt whatever you want in any of those designs. You know now that they're all going to work in different ways on there. So if you're like, don't tell me what to do, Walters, I do what I want. You can definitely do what you want. But if you need a guideline or you want a rule to follow, because I know some of us are rule followers, when you're working through that week's tutorial or those designs, try some different ones. Try ones that maybe are a little bit difficult for you so you can practice them. Or if you're like, I just want to do the starburst over and over again to get the hang of it, that's fine too. So I want to give some guidelines, but I don't want to make it so restricted that it becomes overwhelming. So again, you can do whatever you want. And right now Dina's like, that doesn't help me. In the example, next week's free quilting diagrams will have the suggested design placement for the whole quilt. So if you really want this is what Angela says goes great here, but you've probably noticed I have two different quilts I'm showing here, plus the quilt I'm actually quilting on the film or on the video. So if you look at one, it's quilted different than the other. It's totally fine. So it's just design ideas that come up. So hopefully that helps. Now this question came up on my website. It was a comment on a blog post, and it was somebody who was super excited to do the the free motion challenge, but they didn't have a ruler base for their long arm. And they said, do I really need a ruler base if I'm going to quilt with rulers on my long arm? So a ruler base, for those of you that have a long arm where you move the machine, not the fabric. So I'm not talking about a sit-down long arm where you're moving the machine. That ruler base gives you a wider platform to hold that ruler. You can technically quilt without one, with a ruler, but I don't suggest it. I like to say I think there's only one rule in free motion quilting, and that's you have to use a ruler base on your long arm. It only takes one time of breaking your ruler, throwing your machine out of time, and you would have just have wished you had got a ruler base. So I highly, highly suggest it. Check with your manufacturer or your dealer if you're not sure what to get. And I leave the ruler base on my machine 100% of the time. I never take it off, so that it's always there when I want to use it. So hopefully that helps. Again, those are the questions that came up before we went. Now, another interesting topic came up via Susan. And so Susan was saying, hey, could you please show more of like the in-between the quilting, like all of the things like moving the quilt and repositioning. And I kind of typed on there, I was like, well, I would make the videos longer, but my catch-22, my conundrum is, if the videos are too long and people click off of it, YouTube is going to think, oh, they don't like what she's saying. Let's not suggest this video. Plus, I also like to watch videos that are quick and to the point. So I kind of edit to myself. But I would like your opinion. Susan suggested let's have a poll because other people were chiming in with their opinions. So here's what I got for you. If you'll leave a comment on the video, let me know what you think. Do you want to see all the nitty-gritty? Do you want to see the turning and the smushing and the, that, or you just kind of want to get the design so you can go work on it? I don't know what the right answer is. Maybe I can strike a middle ground, or maybe have some extended videos, but I would really love to hear what you all think. So leave a comment on the video after I'm done going live, and next week I will pick a random commenter and I will give them a pretty cool prize. It may even be that quilted pillow panel behind me that's on the wall. So again, I would love your opinion on it. Sometimes I get so in my own world, so like focused on what I like. I just want to make sure that I'm not taking advantage or taking your time for granted. I don't want to waste your time because I know that attention, we have so much things going on. I don't want to do anything that's going to not be a good use of your time, if that sounds right. So again, leave a comment on this and I will I'll pick a random winner next week. I just want to know what you think, and we'll see what we can decide. So next week's video, it's actually kind of timely because I am in the process of editing Tuesday's video. Yes, I like to go right down to the wire. And so some of the things I'm talking about is the center of the quilt. And I even had this little part where I'm like, all right, we're working in the center of the quilt. It's heavier than it is now. And there is a lot of turning, a lot of smushing and pushing. And so a lot of that gets cut out because, do you really want to see me move the quilt? If you do, I will show it. So anyway, I would love, love, love to get your opinion on that. And again, I love the live chats and getting to talk with everybody to see, get your opinion and figure that out. So anyway, next video will be out on Tuesday. We're going to talk about quilting the center star, and then we're going to do some dot-to-dot echoing in the background. So only 2 more videos left in this series. It's kind of crazy how fast it's gone by. So until then, everybody, I hope that you stay safe. I hope that your bobbins stay full and that your quilting goes flawlessly. And I'll see you next Tuesday with the next video in the series, and the next Thursday for the live chat where we will recap it. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.